start the webinar? Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. The program will begin in a few minutes. For the meantime, please relax and settle down.
We want to ensure that the audience as well as our speakers can have a pleasant experience today. So we would like to remind you of the following. First, this webinar shall foster a positive, free learning environment and safe space for diverse ideas. Display of improper conduct during the event may result in removal from the session. Please be patient and respectful with everyone. Second, you may send your questions for the speakers in the Zoom Q&A box. They will be answered during the Q&A segment towards the end of the event. And third, a certificate of participation will be given upon answering the evaluation form posted at the end of the event. With that, we hope that everyone can enjoy the event and learn something worthwhile today.
Again, good afternoon, everyone. The program will begin in a few minutes. For the meantime, please relax and settle down.
We want to ensure that the audience as well as our speakers can have a pleasant experience today. So we would like to remind you of the following. Again, This webinar shall foster a positive, free learning environment and safe space for diverse ideas. Display of improper conduct during the event may result in removal from the session. Please be patient and respectful with everyone. Secondly, you may send your questions for the speakers in the Zoom Q&A box. They will be answered during the Q&A segment towards the end of the event. And lastly, a certificate of participation will be given upon answering the evaluation form posted at the end of the event. With that, we hope that everyone can enjoy the event and learn something worthwhile today.
Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to welcome you all to this afternoon's event entitled Building Bridges, Unraveling the Cultural History of the Chinese in the Philippines.
An alternative class learning experience webinar presented by the UP Chinese Student Association and the Asian Center.
My name is Aleli Choi.
And I am Terrell Saw. We are your hosts for today.
This afternoon, we are greatly honored to have invited two distinguished speakers who will discuss the history of Chinese settlement in the Philippines and China-Philippines relations and tensions.
That's right, Aleli. The organization opted for this topic because sentiment towards the Chinese, and by extension the Chinese Filipinos, is on a downtrend due to current global and geopolitical events and issues. Through this webinar, we hope that we can clear up misconceptions about the Chinese Filipino community and help our viewers gain a better understanding of the Chinoys.
To officially kick off our program, may we call on the officer in charge and assistant to the Dean for Cultural Affairs of the UP Asian Center, Dr. Matthew M. Santamaria, for his opening remarks.
Good afternoon. On behalf of our Dean, Dr. Henelito Sevilla Jr., I am indeed delighted to give this welcoming remarks for this webinar titled Building Bridges, Unraveling the Cultural History of the Chinese in the Philippines. I am also most happy to see that we are collaborating with the UP Chinese Student Association, and it is wonderful that you have chosen the Asian Center as your partner for this afternoon's event. And I'm also delighted to know that your objectives are quite clear. We have here to clarify misconceptions about the Chinese Filipino community, to show the history of Chinese settlements in the Philippines, and to explain the existing tensions between the Chinese and other groups due to cultural, social, and political differences. I must admit that I am not a China studies expert, and I am here because I am the officer in charge. But it doesn't mean that I am not at all interested in the Chinese community in the Philippines. They say when everything else fails, one must resort to one's lineage. And I must admit to everybody that I'm actually part Chinese. My paternal great-great-grandfather is Chinese from Canton, and my maternal great-great-grandmother is Chinese from Fujian province. Although we have lost already the language in the family, we still recognize those roots. With that, allow me to say a few things that seem to mark Chinese Filipino studies in the Philippines. We seem to have produced quite a number of scholarship. We know that Ed De Jesus has given a wonderful book on the tobacco monopoly and the role of the Chinese in it. Carl Flen has written a wonderful piece on taxation in the Philippines. Carol Howe has written lots of manuscripts on literature and on popular culture of the Chinese Filipinos. Charles Ong, one of my favorite novelists, has also written about the Chinese in the Philippines. Edgar Wickenburg has written about the Chinese in the 19th century, and the same can be said of Richard Chu. Today, we have two distinguished scholars, Teresita Angsi, our ally in the Asian Center, and I'm most privileged to see her here today because she has helped us in so many programs in the past, especially in training programs that we have held in the Asian Center. And of course, Dr. Tina Clemente, our expert in the field here at the Asian Center. What can I say about scholarship on the Chinese community in the Philippines? Well, I've said that we have produced quite a lot. And it appears that we know quite a bit, but it seems that in the Philippines, we still need to do quite a lot. A lot can still be done in terms of integration and in terms of appreciating the contribution of the Filipino-Chinese community to the Philippine nation itself. Allow me now to give three general observations on the Chinese in the Philippines and the markers of their life in national life. First of all, it seems that when we talk about Chinese roots, almost all Filipinos can actually say that they have Chinese ancestry, but usually this Chinese ancestry is glossed over in favor of Spanish or even American. And I am quite perplexed because Chinese civilization is much, much older than European civilization or American civilization. And perhaps we need to examine why this is so. Could this be a remnant of our colonial mind? Number two, the Chinese have indeed contributed a lot to our society, not only in economics, but also in culture, in our food culture, in our general day-to-day speech, in our vocabularies. But it seems that we have only recognized one Chinese holiday. Correct me if I am wrong. Need we recognize more? And I think we should, because if we do affirm that they are an important part, the Chinese Filipinos are an important part of our culture and national life, then we should be celebrating the events that matter to them. Number three, I think we should study the Chinese in the Philippines as an indigenized community. The Chinese in the Philippines is not the same as the Chinese in mainland China or the Chinese in Taiwan. Their unique culture has evolved through encounters with different Filipino cultures in the islands. This is like the Peranakan culture in the Straits, in Sumatra, in the Malay Peninsula, and in Singapore. They have their own food culture. They have their own language. I dare say that the Fukkienese being spoken in the Philippines has already developed far away from that of its origin, province of origin. We also have the Fukien opera, which we still see in Binondo nowadays, and it's quite different from that to see in the mainland China. And this shows you that culture is changing, culture is developing, and culture is continuously transforming itself through different encounters with other cultures. And that, I believe, could be a wonderful start to our questioning and our revisiting of our building of bridges among our communities. I do believe that the bridges have already been built, but I think we need to build stronger bridges, bridges that will enlighten us and bridges that will move us forward, that will help us build a Filipino nation that is multicultural and more accepting of its Chinese and other heritage. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon of collaboration and discussion. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santa Maria, for that wonderful message. The UP Chinese Student Association is really grateful to the Asian Center for partnering with us for our ACLET this semester. This afternoon would truly not be possible without the collaboration between our two organizations. And with that, without further ado, let us proceed to the main part of our program. Let us meet the first speaker for today.
She has been a social activist, educator, cultural worker, and author throughout her adult life, being the founding president of Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran, which serves as the executive trustee of the Kaisa Heritage Center, which houses Bahay Chinoy, the Museum of the Chinese in Philippine Life, the Chin Ben Si Memorial Library, and the Kaisa Research and Data Bank. She has made outstanding contributions to peace and social cohesion for the past 50 years. She has written and co-authored 17 books, the most popular being Chinoy, The Story of the Chinese in Philippine Life, and 5 volumes of Chinese in the Philippines, Problems and Perspectives. She is more well known for her anti-crime advocacy as a prime mover behind the citizens' action against crime and the movement for restoration of peace and order, two of the most active anti-crime NGOs, and serving as the executive chair of Manila's People's Law Enforcement Board to this date. Her lecture today will be regarding the Chinoys in the Philippines, debunking misperceptions, stereotypes, and prejudices. We are so honored to have her with us today. Let's give a warm virtual round of applause to Madame Teresita Angsi.
Okay. Thank you, Tyrell, for that introduction. Wait a minute, okay. Share screen. And thank you, Dr. Santa Maria, for your message. To tell you frankly, you see it now? Okay.
Yes po, ma'am. We can see
Okay,
it.
huh? Yeah, to tell you frankly, my favorite topic is the indigenization and the localization of the Chinese in the Philippines. But I was asked to talk about the misperceptions, the stereotypes, the recent racial tension. In fact, Dr. Santa Maria, we invented the word Chinoy, popularized it in 1992, precisely because of what you said. If there are Peranahakans in Indonesia and the Baba and the Nonya in Malaysia, we have Chinoy. The identity is could be Chinese, but they are of could be the identity is Filipino, but they are of cultural heritage. Okay. Okay. I really like the title of the seminar of building bridges, because we need to build bridges so that we can really enlighten people and enhance understanding. Okay, there. So undercurrents of racism has always lain below the surface, and it becomes dangerous when it's exploited by politicians and interest groups for their self-serving interests. I recall 1985, the anti-Chinese mass rally in Angeles, Pampanga, which became the reason behind the reorganization of our group Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran that hibernated during martial law. And some may remember, of course, Eli Pamatong and a presidential wannabe who burned a Chinese flag because he felt and threatened to have a rally to scare the Chinoys. Because he wanted to run for office, and of course Jun Ducat, who even climbed up the welcome rotunda to express his objections to Chinoy candidates. Okay. And of course, more recent, we have anti-Chinese comments from Frankie Chanel Jose and Solita Monsod. And even more recent is our own UP alumni, Tiffany Uy. I don't know if I think I saw her name here, the scholar ng Bayan. And we still suffer, no? She wasn't exempted from such prejudices. As I said, undercurrents of animosity and racial tension exist because mainly of the economic disparity in economic status and social class. Filipinos living below the poverty line, of course, have showcased the economic nature of prejudices and exacerbate the cultural differences and the ways of life. Remember, even Winnie Monsod would say some things like most of our billionaires are Chinese Filipinos. Is that a fact or is that a myth? And Chinese Filipinos are adverse to marrying Filipinos. Again, is that a fact or a myth? My two kids are both married Filipinos, and I think the rate of intermarriage now is about 85%, as high as 85%. The main problem is that people like Winnie Mansell and Frankie Shonel Jose do not differentiate, okay, between the Chinese and the Chinese Filipinos, or the Chinoys, and the Chinese immigrants, or the Chinese in China. Imagine Frankie Shonel Jose saying that the Vietnam is a very good model, and the Chinese, because Vietnam simply expelled the Chinese and their properties were confiscated. Okay, so one of the really good good observation about why this happened is from the sociologist, UP sociologist Randy Bulatao, who said that childhood prejudices and narrow loyalties may be diluted over time, but they remain latent and capable of being mobilized by unwittingly, or by design. So the less adequately ethnic tensions are handled, the more difficult it will be to create one national unity out of the boundaries of various ethnic components, okay? Because the problem is that people conflate the Chinoys, the local Chinese Filipinos, whose roots are deep in Philippine soil and whose hearts and minds are with the Filipino people, with Chinese issues, with China, with new Chinese immigrants. Of course, the recent China and Chinese issues, the West Philippine Sea, and these things foment even ethnic tensions, or worsen the ethnic tensions. Remember the Duterte's people to China, refusal to enforce the tribunal's ruling, and delayed infrastructure. But many of these, like the delayed infrastructure, are not really China's fault. Of course, it is our Philippine government's fault for not doing due diligence. So there's a lot of questions and problems that arise from infrastructure problems. So things like this are not funny. Headlines like this provokes or worsen ethnic tension. Okay, even if the banner was based on Duterte's own joke that we should be a province of China, and he explained this, and he said this in a public forum. Okay, aside from this would be actions like immigration agents assisted by the police. They pick up anyone who look Chinese. So sometimes innocent bystanders who are just playing video games in the mall, or children or students who go there after classes, are included in the roundup, and they are treated worse than convicted criminals. And all they did, even if they are immigrants, all they did was to choose the Philippines as their destination. Okay, the frequency of the raids do not seem to be a deterrent to these new immigrants, because they find that the Philippines is good to build a new home for them, just like what our ancestors did. Can somebody keep time, please? I forgot to keep my time. Warn me if I have only 10 minutes or 5 minutes left. Thank you. Okay. And of course, social media is very fond of blowing up the negative behavior of the Chinese immigrants. So, the Xinqiao, or the new Chinese incident, the Taho throwing, and they're very fond also, social media, of course, blur the distinction between these new immigrants and the Chinoys. They're not aware that even the Chinoys, they're not aware that even the Chinoys suffer also. This cause, the prejudices and the stereotypes cause problems, not just with Pinoys, but also with the Chinoys. They posted a warning in some of the buildings where the new Chinese immigrants stayed, and and ask them that and ask them to go back to their homes, okay? And prodded the Chinoys to stand up to protect their peaceful homes. So, I mean, this divisiveness occurs not just with Filipinos who do not understand who these Chinoys and who these Chinese immigrants are, but even with the local Chinoys and the Chinese, okay? But we have to consider that bad behavior is bad behavior. It doesn't matter if the one who committed it is a Pinoy, a Chinoy, or Chinese, or Americans, or Indians. If we take the race out of the equation, we don't blame the entire race for the misbehavior of vagrants throwing stones from the flyovers, or throwing feces and trash to passing trains, passing commuter trains. We do not blame the whole Filipino race just because of the action of these misbehaved young Pinoys. Okay, racism, prejudices, stereotypes are un-Christian, un-Filipino, inhumane against against anyone, regardless of race, regardless of social status. Okay, so samples of headline called Gordon saying that pogos are cover for China spies. Of course, newspapers sale because of sensationalized and irresponsible headlines like this, disregarding the harm that they may be causing. Okay. Of course, another headline is this TV anchor who claims that China now owns the Philippines and things like that. Okay, as if the sensationalized headlines are not enough, the worst of China bashing and Chinese bashing and xenophobia, of course, occurred during the pandemic. The coronavirus prompted hysterical xenophobia everywhere. No, this one sample in Italy. People who say that the virus originated in Wuhan and all these things without looking at the science of the reports. And so even us in Kaisa had to do a lot of troubleshooting and firefighting by warning people that the you versus us attitude, finger pointing, and racism, the infodemics, in fact, are deadlier and cause even more permanent damage than the virus we are now fighting. And we admonish that there's no room for divisiveness because viruses know neither race nor boundaries. So we have to stop spreading the virus and as well as stop spreading the racism and instead help those who are afflicted. And use our energies and resources in helping those in need, and because it is the only civilized and Christian thing to do. Okay, there have been a lot of unfair blaming and stereotyping like this. Okay, one of the favorites is that I think Dr. Santa Maria also mentioned it, that the Chinoys are culturally alien and clannish. So my question is, does preference for pancit to spaghetti or preference for siopao to hamburger make people culturally aliens? Or the opposite, no? If I prefer lanzones to longan or suha to grapefruit, does that make me culturally alien? And these things. And other stereotypes include Chinese are politically unreliable and disloyal, forgetting the fact that the Chinese never had any imperialistic ambitions towards the Philippines. And they fought side by side with Filipinos against the Spaniards, against the Americans, and the Japanese colonial rule. They stood at EDSA side by side with Filipinos, okay? Because our blood may be Chinese, but our roots grow deep in Philippine soil and our bonds are with the Filipino people. So there are many more prejudices like this and conclusions and misperceptions like this. And I go back to the main topic of building bridges by citing some of the economic nature of these prejudices. Okay, one of the top misperception or stereotype is the fact of Chinese economic control. Okay, so 90% of the Chinese Filipinos are productive citizens, permanently residing in the country or even born in this country. So their capital and businesses are part of the native economy. Profits are reinvested into the country instead of repatriated to mother companies abroad. So earnings are also spent here for their own consumer needs. Talking of economic control, vital industries like fuel and power generation are not Chinoy owned except as stock owners. Major fuel companies, Shell, Petron, Caltex in this country are still owned by multinational. Of course, increasingly, Chinoys are entering the fuel industries like Uni Oil, for example. There are no Chinoys in another very vital industry, mass transportation like jeepneys and buses. We all know what a stranglehold jeepneys and buses have on our economy, because if they go on mass strike, businesses are paralyzed. Admittedly, Chinoys are now in shipping and airlines, which are vital in transport of goods and supplies and raw materials. So this, can you now conclude that this is an economic control of the economy? I don't know, maybe Dr. Tina Clemente can elaborate later on when she talked about some of the economic relations. So number 4 of the economic control, no? The Chinese are dominant in the trading business, buy and sell, which was open to them during colonial times. Hence, they are earlier than the native Filipinos in the buy and sell trading business. It's not out of choice, but it is a deliberate colonial policy. Okay? High-profile magnates like Henry C. John Doe Congi de Teisanos are in fast turnover, visible department store business. They need publicity to boost their sales. The rest of the Chinese are quietly doing their share, inspiring the country to be the next miracle of Asia. So, Jollibee Hamburger, McDonald's, Mercury Drug, Manila Bulletin, Mang Inasal, Green Cross, and other name brands, they are not less Filipino because they are produced or owned by Filipinos of Chinese descent. They employ Filipinos, they serve Filipino customers, and their profits redound to our country. So, but unfortunately, more than the cultural prejudices, the economic nature of prejudice is more prevalent. The myth of control, that the business-minded Chinese are successful, they are rich, they are industrious, but without thinking that these people really built their fortunes with their sweat, blood, and tears. Okay, they are dynamic, they are risk takers. That's why they became the pioneers in businesses, and this reflects reflects their economic success. And unfortunately, this also intensified the belief or the stereotype that the Chinese are all economic animals. But then they do not consider that the Chinese businessmen are not a unified, homogeneous group. In fact, cutthroat competition may even be keener between them and the Chinese Filipinos. So it is impossible for them to form a cartel to dominate, much less to control the economy. It's the historical and social forces that made the Chinese Filipinos predominantly in business. And I had lectured on this many, many times in the past, okay? It takes one whole lecture altogether to elaborate on these things. So the business ability of the Chinese is something acquired by demands of the Philippine government, and it is not something inherent in the Chinese makeup. So it is a myth to believe that all Chinese are good in business, okay? So also, less than 30% of Chinese businessmen are members of trade organizations, okay, like the Chinese Chamber of Commerce and all these things. So they do not monopolize a particular trade, and not all Chinese are in businesses. While Filipinos are scrambling to get US, Canadian, Australian visas, the Chinese Filipino professionals are now shining in their fields and serving our own country to the best of their abilities. Many of our best architects, engineers, doctors, nurses, and educators are now Chinese Filipinos. Okay, there are young Chinese Filipinos abroad, just like many of our overseas workers. They also left home to earn precious dollars to support their families here, not in China or in Taiwan, but here where their homes are. So we are all Filipinos regardless of our ancestries and cultural heritage. The earlier we learn this lesson, the earlier we can mobilize all sectors of society to work together for the greater future of our country. Okay. As I said, the Chinese are also successful in such light manufacturing as textile, winery, cigar, and cigarettes, because they were the pioneers in these fields. These were lumber, hardware, flour trading. These were fields that were opened up very early for the Chinese. So long before others dared to venture into unexplored areas, the Chinese already risked their capital, sacrificed their comforts, and poured their sweat and blood as pioneers in these businesses. After the war, in fact, they did not wait for war reparations to reconstruct their businesses. So why now do we begrudge them their well-earned successes? The homogeneity of the Chinese is a myth. The Chinese in Manila is vastly different from the Chinese in the provinces, and urban Chinese are different from the rural Chinese brothers. So how can there be dominance by people who cannot even agree among themselves or work together? The important factors behind race, class, and politics is the lack of understanding. We do not even differentiate the generations between the local-born Chinoys and Chinese immigrants, between the Chinoys in Metro Manila and the provinces, and those who have already integrated and transformed their identities to become Chinese Filipinos, okay? There's differentiation even among the immigrant generation. Their attitudes, their values, their politicization, their orientation are also different. So the undercurrents of racism is easily exploited because of class versus race, the social cost of economic success. Sometimes, for example, problems between employer and employee is a class problem, but became a racial problem because the employer is a Chinoy, or problems within a teacher and a student because the teacher is Filipino, the student is Chinese. Then that problem of misunderstanding between them became blown up to become a racial problem. And of course, the power of social media, which is very much weaponized in our country, it exacerbates the controversies versus having reasoning and intelligent discussion. The social media further blow this up and exacerbate the situation. Just quickly to show you na hindi naman tayo nag-iisa, no? You have racism happens worldwide all the time. Crime against humanity happens everywhere. No? cartoons like this, the Wong brothers, two Wongs, do not make it white, and all these things. This one, the Abercrombie and Fitch, receive a lot of bashing because it used Buddha bash. Get your Buddha on the floor, and so it was a big insult to the religion, no, of the Chinese. So it received a lot of bashing. This one is 1880. Okay. The cartoon endorse a poison made for arsenic and coal, saying that this poison should be fed to the Chinese. Okay, so the same way, during the pandemic, you have a sign in a nail shop in Vietnam saying that Chinese customers are not welcome. No, we do not accept you and your coronavirus. So this existed everywhere. No, and things like Chinatown being burned down in Solomon Islands, the South Pacific anti-Chinese riots. Hindi talaga tayo nag-iisa, no? In Africa and elsewhere, no. There's always a lot of envy and repercussions, especially when you have people living below the poverty line and they perceive the Chinese as being of all beings of upper social class and a class of exploiters. Okay, so recently you have the Asian hate crimes. Even Filipinos are often victims of these people who vandalize the stores, who even beat up Filipinos, even all Filipino elders. No? These are happening, and it is very, very disturbing that in the 21st century, we still see these things happening. So what we should emphasize actually are the ties that bind our two people together, and we learn to enlighten ourselves that the Chinese have gone a long, long way towards identity transformation and integration. From the Huasang and the Huapong during the Spanish times, they became the Huachao during the American occupation. Huachao are sojourners who still think of going back to their home country, China. And now they became the Huaren and the Huai, or the Chinoys. Okay, significant transformation has happened, and among all Southeast Asian countries, the process of integration of our ethnic minority has been quite smooth and more successful. We are very glad that even racism, undercurrents of racism, even if they exist, it doesn't explode into violence like what happened in Solomon Islands and elsewhere. New generations of locally born and Philippine-rooted Chinoys are now the reality, and now even the new Chinese immigrants already have offspring, one generation of offspring from new immigrants from China, and changes in the identities of both have been significant. They have occurred. So the younger generation intensified their identities as Filipinos of Chinese descent, while the children of new immigrants are also coming of age. And we are hopeful that with the influence of the Chinoys, integration will also happen smoothly and successfully. I will quickly share a few slides, okay, of my survey of Chinoys 1995 and 2016. Filipino citizenship is 89%, 93% say Philippines as home. It was 97% in 1995, and I will attribute this because of the new immigrants who still consider China as home. So 84% are Christians, 87% has Filipino, English, or dialect as their first language, and only 0.5 are Mandarin speaking, and 6.4 are Hokkien speaking. And you see this, 60% say they do not mind marrying Filipinos. So another one, 71% say they do not agree that the Chinese should keep out of politics, and 75% say that they should participate and become vocal in current issues, and that they should not just stay quiet about political issues. Okay, they must complain to the government when things are wrong. And lastly, in a game like basketball between Chinese and Filipinos, which one will you side with? 1995 is 76%, and 2016 is 83%. So they will side with the Filipino team. Okay, that's just a quick sharing. It's again one whole lecture in itself. So let me see. I have 10 minutes, right? Okay, this is the last section, just to showcase how much transformation of identity has been happening. Okay, I gave this lecture, this is a 1 hour lecture, but I will share only a few slides. 1 hour lecture last year during the 600th anniversary of Christianity in China. So in a pluralistic society like the Philippines, mutual understanding and acceptance occur because we keep lines of communication open. The belief in the Christian faith is a good bridge of understanding. This photo is the funeral of Cory Aquino at the Manila Cathedral. The Chinoys were allowed to pay our respects in Chinese way of bowing 3 times and then burning the incense. Of course, we did not leave the incense inside the Manila Cathedral. Other things like Chinese priests celebrating Chinese New Year in a high mass by offering incense to venerate ancestors on Chinese New Year Day Mass. There's a lot of things like that because we believe in one Christian God. Okay, through religion and Christian faith, the Chinese gain better understanding and respect for Filipino practices. Tradition and religion do not and should not compete but coexist. Okay. Okay, this is Chinese rites, but other examples are veneration of images like this. This is Santo Cristo de Longos, but in front of the altar here, you have incense, you have divination tablets, you have divination sticks, no? So, and this Santo Cristo de Longos in Ongpil is being venerated by both Filipinos and the Chinese. So even Confucianism and Christianity are have only emphasized that within the 4 Cs, all men are brothers, while the Christian Bible says we are all brothers under one God. And the Confucian Analects say, what you yourself do not want, do not impose on others. While the Christian Bible says, do unto others what you want others to do unto you. So there's a lot of synergism, religious tolerance that help enhance better understanding. This is the Zhongfu Temple in the Chinese cemetery, where you see the Chinese images, the Chinese deities, but behind that you see the Santo Cristo. And here at the side are the 7 wise virgins, figure of the 7 wise virgins in one temple. Because as the Chinoy community evolves, the new norms and forms of their cultural heritage eventually become accepted as a component of the Philippine national culture. Racism, prejudices, misconception, misperceptions can be debunked, corrected, and minimized through enhancement of knowledge and understanding. Like, for example, this webinar that we are doing now, I hope the young students taking up their alternative learning have learned a lot from my sharing. Actually, I should end here, but I have 2 more slides which are not directly related, but it is a topic close to my heart, and it was introduced actually by Dr. Santa Maria when he talked about the only festival being recognized by the Filipinos is the Chinese Spring Festival or the Chinese New Year Festival. So I have two slides that I want to share with you because it is something close to my heart. We said we have to perpetuate, preserve, propagate Chinese cultural heritage because it is deeply embedded in the Filipino psyche, in the Filipino culture, in the tapestry of Philippine culture and heritage. You can find strands of Chinese there. But what is it that we introduce to Filipinos? We should avoid propagating or introducing pseudo-Chinese culture and talk about that behind Chinese successes are good luck charms, geomancy, auspicious dates, and the like. Behind Chinese successes are hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. For example, as I said, the last two slides, Feng Shui is an exact science of harmony between man and nature. But now you do not know where superstition starts and where the facts really ends. The two characters Feng Shui mean wind and water, which must always be balanced to avoid catastrophe. Okay? It teaches man that the principles on how he can live his life and keep the balance so that and not to defy nature and court its wrath. Okay? Example, the doors cannot face the north in China because of the cold, bitter wind blowing from the north in winter. But in the Philippines, our doors and windows should not face the west because of the very hot afternoon sun in the west. Okay, so this is harmony between man and nature. For example, spring cleaning is very much desired during New Year. No, it's not to bring in the luck and not to so that is to bring in the luck inside your house, no? But decluttering your house, cleanliness, let energy flow and life becomes better. So it's not the superstition that do this, and we should really teach our Filipino brothers that behind these successes are centuries of blood, sweat, and tears. And the last, of course, is this one. No, my pet peeve during New Year. No amount of exploding firecrackers can drive out misfortune if you don't work hard. Exploding of firecrackers in ancient times was not to ward off evil spirits. Okay, the legend is that during Chinese New Year or during spring, after the hibernation of winter, the wild animals started looking for food. So they roam around and you explode firecrackers to drive them away. The crackle and flames of burning bamboo frightens away the nian or the evil spirits, which actually were the wild animals awakened after hibernation. So now, why do you create this harmony, destroy life and property, start the year with harm and imbalance, create so much noise, destroy the environment? So that means you attract and not drive away the evil, and that is not good feng shui because people get sick from pollution, and also this worsen the global warming and climate change. So I end with this, with the important lesson that we should share our cultural heritage with the Filipinos, but in fact, the reality is the best of Chinoy culture is already deeply embedded in Philippine national culture, and this is what we should all be proud of. Thank you very much. That ends my presentation. Okay.
Thank you so much for that amazing and very informative presentation, Madam Alcy. As a Chinese Filipino myself, I would like to just say that it was a very rich and deep discussion spanning almost all aspects of my life as a Chinoy. Most noteworthy to me were the aspects about politics, such as Chinoy candidates and issues on charter change, so cha-cha, as well as issues regarding climate change and being good stewards of nature, the environment. Thank you so much for that, and I'm sure everyone in the attendance learned something as well today. Thank you.
Thank you again so much, Mr. Sika Angsi. And now let us proceed to our second speaker for this afternoon. She is a professor at the Asian Center, University of the Philippines, Diliman. She earned her PhD and MA in economics, as well as a bachelor degree in business economics at the School of Economics, UP Diliman, with her research interests including the expansive Chinese studies, Philippines-China economic relations, economic history, and development studies. She is the editor-in-chief of the Chinese Studies Journal, a co-editor of the Studies of China and Chineseness since the Cultural Revolution, Volume 2, Micro-Intellectual History Through Decentral Lenses, and lead editor of China Studies in the Philippines, Intellectual Paths and the Formation of a Field. She was awarded the Gawa Chancellor Awardee for the 2022 Natatanging Guro, was a program convener of the China Studies Program of the UP Center of Integrative and Development Studies, and a former president of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies. Her lecture today is entitled Studying the Chinese in the Philippines, Agency in Scholarship. Let us give a warm virtual round of applause to Dr. Tina S. Clemente.
Okay, let me just share my screen now. Wait, hold on. All right. Okay, so actually, I would have preferred that Tessie continued her her lecture because I like learning about all these things. No, there's a lot of history to really go back to. Mahirap kasi ngayon, ano, if we don't take hold of that history, so many things, no, so many things we tend to miss. No, the lack of nuance, no, in contemporary analysis. Okay, so as I expected, the talk that Tessie gave was really so rich, and I consider my part, my part of the program, my lecture, as the comic relief part. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, I'm going to talk about studying the Chinese in the Philippines, agency and scholarship, and you're probably wondering why am I emphasizing the notion of agency? I think a lot of my publications, a lot of my research focus or underscore the notion of agency because I want to give salience to the importance of choice, right? So even in building bridges, it's deliberate action. It's an outgrowth of our personal choices. So okay, let me just begin with a brief outline. This is just gonna be very fast. I was given 30 minutes. I forgot to punch my timer here. Start with just a brief introduction, how I got into things, how I entered into studying China and the Chinese. And I'll go into China as an area of study, and then Chinese in economic history, relationships, and so-called calls for loyalty. And then I'll close with three things. No, I'll just leave you three things. Okay. So other scholars who study Chinese in the Philippines or Chinoys, perhaps have an ethnic connection, right? Or others perhaps have something historical, like they lived in China for a long while. In my case, it all started with martial arts. That's where it started. And I'm not even gonna say that I was a fan of Bruce Lee because for some reason, I chose to be a fan of Jackie Chan. Okay, and you millennials perhaps don't know who Jackie Chan is, and you also don't know probably who Jet Li is. But when I was growing up, rather than take my afternoon naps, I always look forward to the Chinese movies, particularly what they call kung fu movies at the time, right? So I was perhaps in elementary school or not even that young, and I just took them all in. So I recall that I latched on to to these movies because I was attracted to, you know, I was attracted to insights on traditional culture. You know, so in the martial arts movies, there'd always be talks about clans, talks about what martial arts school was better than the other, traditions, ceremonies, those things. So I think I was trying to recall why I didn't go into Bruce Lee movies too much, because the setting would always, it would always be a face-off between Bruce Lee and Westerners. And the setting, a lot of the Bruce Lee movies would have settings in the West. And I was really into more on what China looked like at the time. So at the time, that was my first exposure, right? And later on, there were these movies. It's a series called Once Upon a Time in China. So bata pa si Jet Li dito. At kahit bata pa siya dito, syempre hindi niya siya maalala, right? And so I was fascinated, right? Because there were these social, political, and economic undercurrents, in the themes. So yeah, so it really started me off, that way. I wasn't really into the scholarship yet, but that started the interest. Yeah, so yan yung unang-una. But later on, when I got older, right? I think I visited China for the first time in 2004. And I visited practically every year after that, right? And so China began as an area of study for me. But I think I can formally say that it started in grad school, right? There was this growing interest in grad school. It was the 1997 financial crisis, late in my graduate school period. Pinanganak na ba kayo noong 1997? But in 1997, it was the AFC, the Asian financial crisis in the Philippines, was hit. And at the time, there was a lot of excitement in discussing how China was so insulated, right, from the crisis. So that was, I think, the first time as a budding scholar that I set my sights on it, right, as an interest, right? Because I was in the economics program, I was looking at it from an economic standpoint only, right? But alongside that, the interest grew, and not just not just when it comes to studying China as an economy, but also looking into its history and culture a little bit more. So I was able to go to China in 2008 to be a spectator in the Beijing Olympics. Yay! It was so exciting, right? And I had an interest in observing, right? What was the social ethos at that time? Anong pakiramdam? What was the atmosphere? And then although I don't identify as Chinoy, like Professor Santa Maria, there's always talk in the family among the elders that my great grandmother was Chinese, and I'm like asking, paano kaya yun? No? But whenever I'm in China, everybody swears that I'm one of them. Ganyan. But yeah, so lahat tayo, di ba? May dugong Chino. But yun, no? So it kind of grew as an area of study. But I started getting interested in studying overseas Chinese or Chinese Filipinos or Chinese in the Philippines because of because of economic history, right? So in my economics program, I also went into economic history, and so this is how it started, right? So looking at China on one hand, the contemporary economy, right, that was insulated from the crisis, but on the other hand, my other research strand, my other stream, of when it comes to research and academic pursuits, is the area of institutions. So we learn about institutions and contract enforcements, and you study many things, like, let's say, the Maghrebi traders during the Mediterranean or the medieval period. You study Japanese merchants, you study Ethiopian traders, and the interrogation was basically this: when a society does not have strong third-party enforcement, that's what we call it, such as a functioning legal system where agreements can be enforced, what happens is that second-party enforcement, or in other words, enforcement among members of a network would fill the void, right? Because if it's not filled, transactions and the market itself won't grow, right? So it was a simple notion. Actually, it's more complicated than how I say it. But I felt that I'm looking at how these things occur in different societies, and I wonder, why am I not studying such an occurrence in our own history, in our own context in the Philippines, right? And so this is how the story of the Chinese in the Philippines, I felt, deserved to be. I felt that it deserved to be studied in this scholarly vein, and that opened a whole new world for me, because I also had to learn about other themes like historical settlement during the colonial period, issues on integration, identity, and also the dynamics in political economy. So that's how it started. It wasn't a neat thing that I was born into it, or it wasn't something that I took up straight away, but it was a series of choices, right? So I realized with conviction that economic history and history in general is so important. And so you're probably wondering, what does this all have to do with the theme today, which is building bridges? My main argument for this afternoon is that building bridges really comes from how we exercise our own agency, right? It's not just going to be because somebody taught us. Well, that matters too. It's not just going to be because we follow our wise teachers. Well, that matters too, right? Because people are teaching us the right things. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to the choices that we make, right? That we want to understand more. So later on, I went into this. I looked into it, studied it from that vantage point that I mentioned. Because some people, when they read my early work, they think that it's just history, like all other historians. But I did not enter into studying. I didn't start studying Chinese in the Philippines just because of the history. But I wanted to see the potential of a society based on how it treats minorities. That was important for me, right? Because if there were shackles, right, that bound many things, integration, mobility, development, of minorities like the Chinese in the Philippines, but there are other minorities in the Philippines as well, then it speaks a lot, right, about where we're going. So I was looking into that. And so as I went on, as I continued, my interest in networks, and people-to-people relationships, and also the issues of loyalty. I think Tessie already touched on that earlier. So these things grew. Right. So my interest in historical networks of the Chinese spilled over to the contemporary period, which motivated me to analyze how social, political, and economic circumstances evolved, in the context of these things, in the context of contemporary issues and identity politics. And so in 2015, I came up with this publication. I co-wrote it. It was for the Asian Studies. It was an Asian Center's house journal, Asian Studies. And it was entitled Connections, Contracts, and Sanctions, Informal Commercial Contracting Among Chinese in Manila. And then a few years after, I came up with this article entitled Loyalty on Trial, Chinese Filipinos and the West Philippine Sea Dispute. And it was published in the book entitled Precarious Belongings, right? Precarious Belongings, Affect, and Nationalism in Asia. And I recall when I was preparing the slides for today, I suddenly recalled that while I was doing this work and I was undertaking this research, what struck me was a trip that I took many, many years ago. And then I went to Singapore, went into the museums, and there was this one museum, I don't remember anymore because it was almost 20 years ago. And there was this one museum that exhibited a very old copy of a primary school textbook, right? And it taught school kids about harmonious racial relations, right? Of course, our context here in the Philippines, it is beyond the racial elements, right? A lot of it has to actually do with class, as Tessie pointed out earlier. But it struck me because for all of you, I'm assuming that you know the history of Singapore, how it came to be, and there was a background of racial tension. Remember, Federation of Malaya, and then Singapore got out of it, got kicked out actually, and then suddenly it became Singapore. So racial relations became an urgent concern, right? So the determination was that it had to be taught as early as possible. Okay, so fast forward into the now. I recall that it hit me hard, no? Because I was wondering, why is it that we're focused on, when it comes to integration issues, we're focused on making sure that those who are going to be integrated, need to be taught. But how about teaching everybody else in society? Because it's not like you're just grafting a branch and then you're just thinking of the branch, but you need to think of the whole as well. And so I feel that, as Professor Santa Maria mentioned also earlier, he mentioned indigenization, right? And then Tessie also mentioned it in her presentation. And I mentioned a little bit about that in this work, saying that why can't we consider Chinoys or Chinese Filipinos as one of the people groups in the Philippines? Because I am, like for instance, in my case, I have Ilocano heritage. I'm not so in touch with that heritage, sadly, but maybe in the future I need to, get into it. And also Visayan heritage from my mother's side, so Ilocano heritage from my father's side, Visayan heritage from my mother's side, right? And because the family traveled around so much, also this exposure to different cultures all over the Philippines, also comes into play. So in other words, every Filipino has that connection to multiple cultures, right, within the Philippines. And I just so wonder, and oftentimes when I think about it, I am saddened over the fact that why is Chinese Filipino culture sort of singled out when it's really just one of the people groups? No, so I think so while I was completing this work, what struck me was we need to cultivate better appreciation of people groups in general in the Philippines and locate Chinese Filipinos within that. You know what I'm saying? So so I also remember that before my father passed, he wanted to go back to learning more about Mindanao culture, right? Because I remember during my formative years, my grandfather's so that was my father's generation, no? My father's generation was based in Mindanao because of the state university system. So my grandfather was assigned there. My father spent a lot of years there. And during my very, very young years, I was able to visit maybe once or twice. Ganon. And so before he passed, he had that urge to go back to learn one of the languages. Like he wanted to learn Taoshug, and and when I think about that, I think it's also partly because of our colonial background, right? How we were peopled, how we were put together rather, when the Spanish came. But that's another lecture altogether. But it did affect our appreciation towards each other, right? Towards each other. And earlier, I think Tessie mentioned certain myths, right? And one of the myths was on economics. I think we don't have time to really get into that, but if you're interested in looking at how the economic significance of Chinese in the Philippines is really overestimated, you might want to look up Rupert Hodder's article. It's a 2007 article published in the journal called Philippine Studies. It's an Ateneo journal, so you might want to look it up. It's very interesting, But I'm bringing it up now. I won't really go into it. I'm bringing it up now just to sort of say that a lot of these narratives, that myths, that are divisive, are connected to certain agenda, right? To sort of come up with tirades against groups, and of course the group that we're talking about is the Chinoy. So it's a lot of things, no, a lot of things in it, no. So it's very simplistic to just say that, oh, because they dominate. That has actually been dispelled, no, that myth, no. And so yeah, but perhaps what I would like to really underscore is that building bridges really starts with us. It really starts with our own personal choices in trying to understand what the history is, what the context is, what the nuance is. Okay, so let me just, okay. So in my last slide, on my last slide, you see three things, right? How to build bridges. First is that we need to cultivate interests and linkages in all the ways we can, right? There is no one kind of connection, right? It could be ethnicity. That's fun. You might have been born into it. But also on the other hand, it could just be interests. Like in my case, it started with something so benign such as movies, right? It doesn't have to be connected to scholarship, right? And then you cultivate that because it creates an openness in your mindset, right? That there is really no room for divisiveness, in looking at this issue. And then second thing, you cultivate appreciation of Philippine people groups, no? And there are a lot. And locate Chinese Filipinos within these. Kasi we're all part of one national community, right? And so just imagine I'm saying this and I'm not Chinoy, right? I don't identify as Chinoy. But my interest really is broadening the conversation that singling out a particular people group doesn't help strengthen the national community, right? Our social fiber. Okay, and then finally, I want to emphasize that history matters. So it's not sure. It's okay to know our roots, our own family roots, our lineage, genealogy, but to bring it to a more broader conversation, to make it a more broader conversation, it won't hurt, right? To look things up as well. No? And understanding the different waves of settlement of Chinese in the Philippines would be a good place to start, because right now, whenever there's tension because of something that's connected to the disputes, no, between the Philippines and China, it would somehow always redound to Chinese in the Philippines, right? As if we're conflating. We're talking about synonymity here, right? That the Chinese Filipinos are the same as China the state. And so because this conflation is so apparent, it just goes to show that indeed a lot more work needs to be done. That's why I appreciate the efforts and interventions, no, that groups such as the Kaisa Para sa Kundaran are doing, because it takes an all hands on deck approach. It's not just gonna be the intervention of the Chinese Filipino community, but it's all of us, right? I think I go back to my earlier point when I said that when you talk about matters on integration, right, it's not just gonna be focused. It shouldn't just be focused on the group that you're integrating, right? Because all of us are affected. So it should also the education, improving information and reaching out and bridge building. Those things also extend to all of us. No, that's why the first time that I heard or I read, the comments, the columns, of Echenil Jose, for example, that was the first thing that came to mind, right? Did their generation sort of miss out, right, on this kind of education where, we study about different people groups in the Philippines, and we study about history and how settlement in the Philippines, or Chinese in the Philippines settled, in the colonial times, no, and how colonial policy also affected, no, how different people groups related with each other, or how indigenous Filipinos at the time related with others, including the Spanish themselves and also including the Chinese, no? So all of these things kasi, history kasi is always a force. Why? Because of the notion of path dependence. Diba? So the things that we see, no, the tensions that we see in contemporary times, these didn't just sprout. It didn't just happen yesterday, right? It didn't just happen overnight. It's like a long period of layers of misunderstanding, right? And so if that is not arrested, we just keep adding layers. No, kaya nga akala ko, no, the first time that I heard about the attacks on the Chinese from the columns, and these are from learned people, yun pa yung, that's why I thought that I felt so sad at the time, right? The first thing that entered my mind was education. What was the education before, such that a greater appreciation of people groups, of integration, of, you know, of these things in our society, I don't know, was sort of missed out. So that was a big question for me. Okay, so I guess I talked a lot already, and let me just check my time. Yeah, so I think that's the time. That's the only time that I have, and I hope I contributed even just a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Clemente, for your very insightful presentation on the relations between the Philippines and China from both a macro to the macro level. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers have burning questions about the aforementioned contemporary issues and topics that were discussed earlier.
But in case our audience has more questions they would like to ask our two speakers, they may now input them into the Q&A box in Zoom, as we shall now be proceeding to our Q&A segment.
Okay, so the first question is to Ma'am Teresita Angsi. This is actually not really a question toward the talk, but like an invitation. They are currently conducting a research on the Filipino conception of Chinese in the Philippines as part of their course in Andro 225. And they're asking for a possibility to interview you, ma'am, for their project.
Yeah, sure. It just needs tweaking of time and when it will be and what is the coverage of the study. My comment is make sure that when you do this research, your respondents are clear on who are the Chinese in the Philippines that you are referring to. Kasi mamaya, yung mga Pogo, nagtatrabaho sa Pogo, o yung mga Chinese na maiingay sa bar and all these things, instead of the China. It's not that we want to be divisive, no? We should be inclusive. They are still part of our society. But in making this kind of research, your definition of who you mean as the Chinese in the Philippines, will you consider people like the Tihan case, the Gat My Pants, still Chinese in the Philippines, or are they pure Filipinos and all these things? No? But I'd be happy to help you, because most of the social distance studies about the Chinese in the Philippines were conducted in the 60s, no? Very little, except for some of those that I did, no, but they are not social distance studies. Maybe it's time to start redoing those things to understand better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Teresita. And can we request po that how can they contact you po for this project?
I'm you can always search. I'm easily accessible. Anyway, it's info@kaisa.org.ph is the email. No? Sige, pa-type ko na lang.
Thank
Can
you, ma'am.
continue. I will type it in the chat box, in the Q&A box.
Okay, for our next question. Thank you so much for that, Ma'am Darcy Tangson. Next question. We have someone in the attendees raising their hand. Would you like to ask a question?
I think there are 4 other questions in the Q&A.
Should we just read them?
Okay, but I think there's like a slight technical difficulty.
Hello, am I
Hi.
heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry for that. All right, so we have a question right now in Menti. Should a war break out over the currently ongoing issues in the Asia Pacific region, what would be the Filipino-Chinese response? Maybe Ma'am Clemente can tackle this one first.
Okay. Actually, this is like deja vu, no, Tessie? This question. Because the first time I heard this question was in 2012 in an interview with Tessie. So, I think it's clear. I mean, on the part of Chinese Filipinos, on the part of Chinoys, it's clear because they're Filipinos, not to begin with, no. So their motherland is the Philippines. Yun, di ba? So I think that's why it's so important to have foundations on that, to be grounded in that understanding. Kasi we're often confused just because they have Chinese heritage. But I mean, when it comes to loyalty, it's not a question. No, it's not a question. It's just that the prejudices just seem to come up, no, all the time. No, but I think for me, if I were to be asked, I think it's clear. No, the position of the Chinese Filipinos is that in the first place they're Filipinos. Diba? They're Filipinos. So their loyalty is toward the Philippines, their country. Diba? Parang, diba, if you rephrase this, parang sinasabi mo, for Ilocano Filipinos, what would their position be? Of course, they're Filipinos, di ba? For Cebuano Filipinos, what would their position be? So, sa akin, I keep hearing this a lot kasi. So, yun lang yung akin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ma'am. Ma'am Teresita Angsi, how about you?
Well, as I've said, no, our blood may be Chinese, but our roots grow deep in Philippine soil. Our bonds are with the Filipino people. That's the credo of our organization. Time and again, we have proven that in the red part of the Philippine flag, there is Chinese blood in it. There were 6 Chinese uprisings before the National Revolution of 1896. They also fought against the Spaniards, just as the Filipinos fought against the Spaniards. And during the Filipino-American Civil War, you have also the Chinese participating in it, recruiting fellow Chinese, raising a lot of funds because the treasury, Aguinaldo's treasury was already bankrupt fighting the Spaniards. So they raised funds and materials. You can refer to the dati tawag nila insurgency record. Now it's revolutionary records to see the Chinese participation in the Filipino-American Civil War, and then of course the Japanese occupation. So if they at that time, who are not even very well integrated yet, could pour their blood and sacrifice their lives for the Philippines. So how much more is now, no? But having said that, I would say that war will not break out between China and the Philippines just because of the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea, unless we fall into the trap of an instigation by the United States, who always want to export war. No, it will not happen because for generations that that conflicting claim in the South China Sea has existed, and it could not be solved. No, so let us set aside these differences and these contentious issues by working on ways where we can cooperate, no, and build up even more bridges to strengthen the understanding. China has to understand where the Philippines is coming from in its claim of the West Philippine Sea, that it is not the be-all and all that the United States is instigating us, you know, for these things. In the same way, Filipinos should also understand where China is coming from after 100 years of humiliation by these colonials, okay? They will not yield sovereignty over these islands, just like the Philippines will not yield our sovereignty over them, no? So we will not go to war over it, but there is room for mutual understanding and even greater cooperation if we set aside these things that cause tensions and not fall into the trap of what other countries are prodding us to do. When elephants fight, it is the grass that gets trampled upon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very thorough response. Next question, Aleli.
All right. So our next question is, who perpetuates this divide between Filipinos and Chinese? As a Chinoy myself, I do notice older generations of Chinese people be prejudiced toward Filipinos, such as notions like the Great Wall. I think Ma'am Teresita can answer this question.
Well, even among the older generation, the perpetuation of even words like the Great Wall is a social media construct. No, there is no such thing as that. Yes, it's true, intermarriage is not being encouraged. Marriage itself is difficult enough without going into interracial marriages. But then it is not something as taboo as before that you will be disinherited if you marry a Filipino, because it is going on. No? The rate of intermarriage is very, very high. Among my nephews and nieces, 14 of them, only 2 are married to Chinese. All are married to Filipinos. And I am it's typical of many Chinese Filipino families. No? It's a social construct that there is a great wall. No? I don't know who asked this question, that older generation of Chinese people are prejudiced. No? I don't think there is such a thing. Of course, there is prejudice. For example, if your worker is very lazy or always come late, kaso ang nangyayari, it is not prejudice against Filipino workers as such. So it's a prejudice against a Filipino worker that do not work hard, no? For example, galit sila sa mga pulis, no, na nangungutong sa kanila. But it is not a prejudice against the whole Filipino race. Kahit naman tayo, galit tayo sa Filipinos who are prejudiced against us. But then, having said that, no, colonial experience is very, very valid. No, the root cause of this divide, social divide, happened in history. Kaya nga sabi ni Tina, history matters. The Spaniards segregated the Chinese into the Parian. Okay. The Americans applied the Chinese exclusion law in the Philippines, California Act of 1902, and applied it to the Philippines as an American territory. So excluded ka na agad during the American times. And even more so during the Japanese occupation. They separated the Chinese from the Filipinos for fear that they will work together. And it's true, they really did work together. So mga colonial experiences yan. But then post-war era, all these things are started to crumble. No? Kaya I would challenge that there is a Great Wall existing. Piniperpetuate kasi yan ng mga mano po type of pseudo Chinese Filipino movies and culture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that answer. I think we can
Thank you so
proceed to the
much.
next one.
Okay, for the next question. Why is there a difference in perception between Chinoys and mainland Chinese? Like, for example, between Chinoy businessmen and Pogo, for example. Ma'am Tina Clemente, maybe you would like to give your
Why is
thoughts
there a
about
different
this?
perception? Okay, sure. Wait, let me just read it again. Why is there a difference in perception between Chinoys and mainland Chinese? Okay. Okay. There really should be a difference in the first place. I think earlier I was talking about conflation, meaning the notion that there is no difference, right? But yeah, it's different because we're not talking about the same people, diba? But sometimes at the height of tensions, everything is just all, all the same. So Chinoys are Chinese, Chinese are from China, and so, diba? But there's a big difference because Chinoys are Filipino, right? And so Chinese from China, the state, are Chinese, right? So iba ngayon. The second line says between Chinoy businessman and Pogo. Yeah, because so this is very tricky, no? So all the more that we need to be very nuanced here. That is why I think articles that come out need to be more nuanced to avoid any kind of encouragement that these two are the same. So kanina, I remember I caught a statement by Tessie saying that oftentimes people think that there's this perception that the new Chinese migrants, right, are the same as those who have settled here for a long time. No, so may ganon. There's this, but I think it's because of the lack of education, and with the lack of education, there's this encouragement of ignorance. Pardon for the word. So ganon eh. Kasi nga, remember, I made an earlier point that this is the reason why in integration efforts, everyone in society should be involved, right? Not just the integratees, not just those being integrated supposedly. No, it's essentially because of this. Diba? Remember, I mentioned the book that I saw and that struck me a lot. That was sort of, it's forever here in my memory. Because in that book, and it was taught to, these things were taught to primary graders, right? School kids. And as in their formative years, they learn that they learn to appreciate each other. So yung ganon. So yeah, so there really, it should be a difference. That's my short answer. Maybe Tessie would like to add.
Doc Santa Maria would like to
Okay.
add, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to add to the confusion, perhaps. Well, as Dr. Clemente said, the Chinoys and the mainland Chinese are different. They are socialized differently. The Chinoys are socialized in Philippine culture. This is the only place that they know as their own land and their own people. I think we have a problem here when it comes to DNA and to jus sanguinis and bloodlines, because Filipinos always tend to think that just because you have a Filipino blood, then you are Filipino. American Filipinos are Filipino Americans are Americans. And if you meet them, you will know how different they are because they're socialized in America. The same thing when they come here, they act like Americans. I think that is the same thing here. The problem with us is that just because we have the blood of Filipino, we think that we are going to have that DNA and then we are formatted in the same way. No, because our way of thinking and our way of viewing the world is pretty much a function or depends on our socialization. And the socialization of the Chinoys is in the Philippines. They are socialized in our culture. They are indigenized Filipinos. They are Filipinos, and make no mistake about it. And I'm sorry, I just had to add that because we have to banish this thought about the DNA and the blood actually telling us how to think and how to act. No, that is only one very small part of our identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Santa Maria. I think we can move on to the next question now. And also thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that po. Our next question is, how can you inform or educate our Filipino friends that name calling of Chekwa, I hope I'm saying that correctly, to the Chinese Filipino is degrading and somewhat masakit sa tenga? I think Ma'am Teresita can take this one.
Okay, name calling, whether it's against the Chinese or against the Filipino, is always masakit sa tenga, no? And siguro tayo, we start with ourselves, no? Our audience today, they should know that the Chinese hate being called Chekwa or yun Inchik Beho. Although the history of Inchik Beho Tulu Laway is something that is it's real, no? It's based on historical fact that the Inchik Viejo, the old Chinaman, Tulo Laway, is drooling saliva because he's very tired. He sleeps only for 4 hours. My father worked in a restaurant when he was only 9 years old. They are young ones, so they can go to sleep at 9. But the older ones have to clean up the restaurant and go to sleep at 11 and wake up at 5 o'clock to prepare for the next day. I mean, they have very few hours sleep. So whenever there is some lax time, you see them nodding off, falling asleep, tulo daway. So inchik beho tulo daway. So it becomes a ridicule. It becomes a name calling by old Filipinos, but now you hardly hear that. But if you do, then you tell them that that is unchristian and it's inhumane, and that Filipinos likewise would not want to be called barbarians or these things. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ma'am Teresita. I guess we can go to the next question.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Are there books, publications, books or publications that tell stories of Chinese Filipinos' experiences in the Philippines that Filipinos, especially those who are unaware of the issues explored here, should read or be known? Maybe for Tina.
Okay. Yeah, there's a whole lot. You just have to go to the Kaisa library to see all. Yeah, but even at the Asian Center Library, we also do have a lot. I mean, I've written a lot as well, but because there's a whole history, no? I mean, the fact that this question is being asked just makes me think na, wow, we need to do a lot more. There's so much work to be done if this question is being asked. So yes, so the short answer to this question is yes, there's a lot. So since you're in UP already, whoever's, if you're from UP, the person who's asking this, you can just go to class. That's the library search engine, and then just type Chinese in the Philippines or Chinese Filipinos. You'll see a lot. There's really a lot. So like in the at the Asian Center, we have programs, and China is a major program, no? in our graduate programs, and a lot of studies done on China also spill over to studies on Chinese in the Philippines, because as I said earlier, that's the first exposure, right? When we learn about if you want to learn about culture in China, you can't really take out that element of how the culture of China is sort of localized here, no? In the community, in the Chinoy community. So yes, that's my short answer. There's really a lot, from politics, culture, literature, also studies on ethnicity, and there's really a lot. So you just have to search, and if you want to buy, nag-promote ba? you go to Kaisa. There's really a lot.
Yeah, the five volumes, Chinese in the Philippines, Problems and Perspectives. Each article is a lecture in itself, no? Siguro, plugging aside, you can visit Bahay Chinoy, the Museum of the Chinese in Philippine Life, when it opens. So it's under renovation and rehabilitation now. But that pretty much covers. And the kanina meron din questions na I'll just answer that also. A very rich source of pre-colonial Philippine history are the Chinese sources, because the Chinese are a very literate people. They document everything. No? We have a tiny booklet that we sell for only 150 pesos on the story of the Sultan of Sulu who visited China in 1417. Imagine, that's 500 years before, that's 100 years before Magellan. The Sultan of Sulu visited China 1417, paid tribute to the emperor, and died there. So today there are 23 generations of the descendants of the Sultan of Sulu. No, these are stories that you do not know, but these are things that we highlight. The very rich pre-colonial Philippine history. Imagine how civilized and how advanced our Filipino ancestors were, that they were able to sail across the South Seas in sturdy boats enough to reach Beijing in 1417. Before Magellan even found their way here, no? Nandoon na sila, nakarating na sila doon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Ma'am Desmond. For the next question, Alex gonna take that.
Okay, so the next question is, what's the significance in calling Chinese Filipinos as Chinese Filipinos? Why not simply Filipinos? And I think to add to this is also confusion, why Chinese Filipinos and not Phil-Chi or Filipino Chinese, like the switching it, there's like a difference. I think Ma'am Teresita can go first for this one.
Well, it's a process of evolution. We used to be Filipino Chinese, the Huachao, the Chinese who happened to be in the Philippines. And we became Chinese Filipinos, meaning Filipinos of Chinese descent. Of course, we'll be happy to just be called Filipinos, but the Chinese sort of identify is the identifier, the adjective, no? Just like we say Muslim Filipinos, how we wish they can just be called Filipinos instead of Muslim Filipinos or Christian Filipinos, no? So it's true, we call ourselves Chinese Filipinos to differentiate ourselves from the Filipino Chinese, because now the noun is Filipino, the Chinese is the modifier or the adjective that qualifies that they are of Chinese descent and ancestry.
Can I say something?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
You know,
Miss
when
Tina.
you, yes, thank you. Short lang. When you visit different parts of the island, or even when you visit other countries, no, when you encounter people groups like Cebuanos, like Ilocanos, what they say is actually, oh, I'm Cebuano. I'm Ilocano. Wala ngang Filipino eh. So I hope this won't be an issue, really. Diba? Because there is an affirmation of being Filipino, whereas it's really not an issue when other Philippine people groups drop the Filipino. You know what I'm saying? So yun lang, just an addition.
Thank you, Ma'am Teresita and Ma'am Tina. Oh, Dr. Santa Maria, would you like to add something po?
Yes, I would love to add something. A lot of this is really historically determined. For example, the censuses of the Spanish period as well as the American period would have a lot to do with the labelings that remain today. It would really be wonderful to simply drop all of the modifiers, but there's nothing wrong with affirming an identity, a cultural identity. After all of us have ethnic identities. Like I'm part Bisaya and I'm part Tagalog. There should be nothing wrong with that, and nothing wrong with taking pride in it. But the labeling actually coagulated during the Spanish colonial period with the censuses and the taxation processes, where you had to other a certain group. And by othering, then you are able to label them, then you can also tax them at a higher rate. And therefore integrate them by saying, okay, if you're going to marry Filipinos, then you will be considered mestizo already, and then your taxes will go down or will be taken out. So we already have a lot of these studies there. In authorities also matter. Like in Singapore, they have this thing called CIMB. Up to now, they use this. And when they go there, there's always a box for tick off your race. And the race will be CIMO, meaning Chinese, Malay, Indian, or others. No? So most of these labels are actually remnants of colonial period labeling. And it is our wish, really, that all of this will become not so important anymore. And I think that is why the question of what should we do from now on? And I'm actually pointing to we should have policies of integration. We should have policies of calling what the Chinese Filipinos or Chinoys own as also part of our culture. And that is really policies that move us towards a more multicultural Filipino. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Santa Maria. And actually, that is the last question, which will wrap up our Q&A segment for this event. I know there are still a lot of remaining questions, and I think our speakers may reply to them via the chat function instead, or using the type function for the Q&A box. All right, and a lot of these questions are really food for thought, and they were very interesting questions. Once again, we thank you, Madam Angsi and Dr. Clemente, for answering these questions. We greatly appreciate the time and effort you both spent in preparing for this event.
To express our gratitude, may we call on Morgan Gale Lim, the President of the UP Chinese Student Association, and Darwin Alexander Ko, the Vice President for Research and Academics of UPCSM, to present the certificates of appreciation.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the UP Chinese Student Association and the UP Asian Center, this certificate of appreciation is presented to Ma'am Teresita Angsi for sharing their valuable insights in building bridges, unraveling the cultural history of the Chinese in the Philippines, the alternative classroom learning experience held by the UP Chinese Student Association and Asian Center. Given this 12th day of December 2022 via Zoom, signed by Sir Matthew Santamaria, LLD, Darwin Alexander Ongko, and myself, Morgan Lim. And next, we have the certificate of appreciation presented to Ma'am Tina S. Clemente for sharing their valuable insights in building bridges, unraveling the cultural history of the Chinese in the Philippines, the alternative classroom learning experience held by the UP Chinese Student Association and the Asian Center. Given this 12th day of December 2022 via Zoom, signed by Sir Matthew Santamaria, Darwin Ko, and myself, Morgan Lim. And now may I request our hosts and our speakers to turn on their cameras for a photo opportunity. All right, ayan. So I'll be taking the picture. Smile in 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again,
very
Morgan.
much.
Thank you.
Once again, we would like to express our deepest gratitude to our beloved speakers who shared with us their valuable expertise and insights this afternoon. and for the audience for your active participation in our webinar. To deliver his closing remarks, we call on once again the UPCSA Vice President for Research and Academics, Darwin Alexander Ko.
Hello, sorry. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be honest, I didn't really prepare the speech. I was fixing the technical stuff for this webinar this afternoon, but I'll try to keep it brief as we might go over time. But yeah, I'll just make it brief. So first of all, once again, thank you everyone for being here with us today. Thank you to our speakers, our special guests, the UPCSA, the Asian Center, and all our participants. I mean, we are really overwhelmed with your support. I mean, we have participants from different institutions. We have participants all the way from Mindanao, from Visayas. It's so like we're so grateful for your support. And I am speaking to you not only as a member of the organizing team, but also as a member of the audience who is really inspired by this event, everything that we've learned today. Really humbled to be in the presence of two of our most prominent figures in the Chinese-Filipino sphere, and also as a Chinoy myself. So just to share, I guess, 4 years ago, I graduated from a Chinese high school, and I entered a different senior high school, which is more in the Filipino Christian society. And there, I experienced culture shock. Then 3 years ago, I started to try to find the Chinese Filipinos who are also in that community and try to make a group, an organization. And we struggled because it was really hard to find, a sort of role model or a sort of, I guess, motivation and inspiration was difficult to find. So there was that. And then 2 years ago, obviously we all know what happened. There was this big global event that really, changed our lives, and the new normal, just very different. And obviously all of the different types of phobias, xenophobia, and it really came out, and all of those issues and events that were tackled, that were mentioned a while ago, really surfaced during that time. And then 1 year ago, I joined UPCSA, right? I applied and I was accepted, and I joined UPCSA because now that I'm in UP, I also wanted a community, a safe space wherein people can understand me and I can also understand them. And as our two speakers have shown today, now we have so much work to do, right? Not only like as part of the Chinese Filipino community ourselves, but also part of, I guess, the academe and part of the educated, I guess, that with this knowledge that we've earned, we have to do something. And now, obviously, fast forward to now, we're here in this webinar. So it's really been a long ride personally for me, and I'm really grateful for this event today, because it's been a long journey for me, trying to find my identity. There is this one quote, I guess, that I would like to share, which sums up, I guess, like what I'm trying to say, and also, I guess, the vision for this event. It's by the famous Filipino author Nick Joaquin. Sabi niya, the Filipino identity, the identity of the Filipino today is someone who is trying to ask what their identity is, something like that. And I would always look at that quote and try to parang modulate it and make it Chinoy. The identity of the Chinoy today is someone who is trying to find what their identity is, or trying to ask what their identity is. And that is, basically it, I guess. And so on behalf of the UP Chinese Student Association, this is our mission is to try to find out who we are, through discussions like this. Really grateful once again to Teresita Angsi and Dr. Clemente for for your insights. It's really really overwhelming, and talagang it's super inspiring, no, to me, the students, fellow students, and also to our other participants. So I guess to reiterate, thank you again to everyone here. Also, last but not the least, I guess I have to say this. Thank you so much to the Asian Center. On behalf of UPCSA, we are so grateful for your organization's help in presenting this event. No, and special mention, I guess, to Ma'am Princess and Ma'am Danae, and obviously Dr. Sevilla, who's not here with us today, but also Dr. Santa Maria. Thank you so much. This ACLE wouldn't have been a success without all of your support and all of your motivation and guidance. So once again, thank you. I'm Darwin Ko, and thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for that lovely speech, Darwin. And that concludes our webinar this afternoon. We would like to thank everyone who made time to attend this event. We hope that you gained a better understanding of the Chinoys and the Chinese Filipino community.
For those of you who wish to receive a certificate of participation for your attendance, kindly answer the evaluation form flashed on the screen to apply for your copy. Thank you.
And I think that's all from us today. Once again, thank you, everyone. My name is Terrell So.
And I am Aleli Choi. We hope to see you again in the next installment of ACLE. Goodbye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.